Montana Territory, 1876. A woman stands at her bedroom window 6 hours after giving birth, revolver in hand. Below, her husband's nephew and 3 armed men surround the burning ranch. The baby cries behind her, smoke fills the room, and Eleanor Bradford Ashford has a choice to make: hide and watch everything burn, or stand and fight like the Montana timber she was born to be. This is the story of how a giant woman from Philadelphia proved everyone wrong. The wind came down from the Bitterroot Mountains carrying the smell of snow and something older, something that tasted like iron and inevitability. Clayton Ashford stood on the platform of the Helena train station, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his sheepskin coat. He was 42 years old, but the Montana winters had carved lines into his face that made him look older, harder, like something that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. The eastbound train was late. It was always late in winter, fighting through snowdrifts and frozen switches, crawling across the high plains like something wounded. Clayton didn't mind waiting. He had spent the last 3 months waiting ever since he'd sent that telegram to Philadelphia, ever since he'd made the decision that would either save everything he'd built or destroy what little remained. Around him, Helena bustled with the particular energy of a frontier town that thought it might become something more. Miners in from the hills, their pockets heavy with silver dust. Cowboys heading south for the spring drives. Women in fine dresses imported from San Francisco, trying to bring civilization to a place that had no use for it. Clayton ignored them all. His eyes stayed fixed on the eastern horizon, watching for the smudge of smoke that would announce the train's arrival. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Not a pretty face, not a delicate constitution, not the kind of woman who would wilt under the Montana sun and die in his arms like Anna had, her body too small, too fragile, too Philadelphia to survive in a place that demanded strength above all else. Anna. Even now, 2 years after burying her in the small cemetery behind the ranch house, the thought of her brought a familiar ache. She had been beautiful in the way that Eastern women were beautiful, all porcelain skin and gentle manners and a laugh like music. She had loved him, or tried to, and he had loved her, and it hadn't mattered at all. Montana had killed her slowly, pregnancy after pregnancy, that her body couldn't sustain until the 3rd miscarriage had taken so much blood that not even Dr. Mitchell's steady hands could bring her back. The telegram in Clayton's pocket was worn soft from handling the words memorized through repetition. He pulled it out now, unfolding it carefully despite the wind that tried to tear it from his fingers. Need a woman strong enough to work this land and bear my children. Will not stop until my seed takes root in your womb. No lies, no games. Clayton Ashford. Brutal words. Honest words. The kind of words that had probably shocked every respectable woman in Philadelphia who had read them. But Clayton Ashford didn't have time for respectability. He had 6 months to produce a legitimate heir or lose everything his brother Thomas had built, everything Clayton himself had fought to preserve. 6 months before his nephew Marcus could contest the will, could claim that a childless 42-year-old man was unfit to manage 5,000 acres of prime Montana rangeland. The train whistle cut through his thoughts, long and mournful, across the frozen landscape. Clayton straightened, his heart beating faster despite his best efforts at control. This was it. Either the woman who had answered his telegram would step off that train, or she wouldn't, and he would have to start over. Send more telegrams. Wait more months he didn't have. The locomotive pulled into the station in a cloud of steam and cinder smoke, brakes screaming against iron wheels. Passengers began to disembark, moving slowly in the cold, bundled in coats and scarves. Clayton scanned each face, looking for something he couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe. Destiny, if he believed in such things. And then he saw her. Eleanor Bradford stepped down from the last passenger car, and for a moment Clayton forgot to breathe. She was exactly what he'd hoped for, and nothing like he'd imagined. 6'2" if she was an inch, shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, hands that looked capable of real work. Her traveling dress strained across her frame, clearly made for someone smaller, someone who fit into the narrow definitions of feminine beauty that Philadelphia society demanded. But it was her face that held Clayton's attention. Not pretty in any conventional sense. Strong-jawed with eyes that had seen disappointment and survived it, a mouth set in a line that spoke of determination rather than defeat. She carried a single carpetbag, holding it with a grip that made her knuckles white, and when her eyes swept across the platform and found Clayton standing there, something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or desperation, recognizing its reflection. Clayton moved forward, weaving through the crowd of reuniting families and greeting merchants. Eleanor didn't move, just watched him approach with an expression he couldn't quite read. Fear mixed with hope, mixed with something harder, something that looked like the decision to stop running and turn to face whatever was chasing her. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the freckles across her nose, the way her breath came quick and shallow in the thin mountain air. Up close, she was even more magnificent than he'd hoped. Not delicate, not fragile. Built for survival. "Are you Eleanor Bradford?" His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw by 3 months of doubt and a lifetime of Montana winters. "I am." Her voice was deeper than Anna's had been, steadier, with an edge of Philadelphia refinement fighting against something rawer underneath. She met his eyes directly, not looking away or down the way a proper Eastern woman would have. Good. He didn't need proper. He needed strong. "I'm Clayton Ashford. I hope you read my telegram carefully, because I meant every word of it. And I want to say it again now to your face, so there's no misunderstanding between us." She swallowed hard, her throat moving, but she didn't look away. "Say it." Clayton stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him in the frozen air, close enough that his words would reach her, and her alone. "Tonight. After supper. In our bedroom. I'll tell you this. Open your legs. I won't stop until my child is inside your womb. That's not romance. That's not poetry. That's a medical promise. I have 6 months to produce a legitimate heir or lose everything, and I will not let that happen. Can you live with that kind of honesty?" For a long moment, Eleanor Bradford just stared at him. Clayton watched emotions flicker across her face. Shock, yes, but also something else. Recognition. As if she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to speak to her without artifice, without the careful lies that passed for courtesy in polite society. Her hand relaxed on the carpetbag handle. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, and when she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "I can live with it. Can you live with the possibility that I might fail? Philadelphia doctors told me I was broken. Tilted uterus, narrow pelvis despite my size. They said conception was unlikely, carrying to term almost impossible. If you're gambling everything on me, Mr. Ashford, you should know the odds aren't in your favor." Clayton reached out and took the carpetbag from her hand. Her fingers were cold even through her gloves. He met her eyes and spoke the truth that had been burning in his chest since he'd first seen her photograph 3 months ago. "Philadelphia doctors were wrong. You're not broken. You're exactly what I need. And if it takes 6 months of trying or 6 years, we'll keep going until we get it right. But Eleanor, I need you to understand something." He shifted the bag to his other hand and held out his arm to her. She looked at it for a long moment before taking it, her hand large enough to grip his forearm with real strength. "This isn't charity. I'm not saving you from Philadelphia. This is a transaction. You give me an heir. I give you a home, a name, and a place where your strength is an asset instead of a curse. But for that to work, we have to be honest with each other about what we're doing. And what are we doing? Surviving. You were surviving in Philadelphia. I'm surviving here without a future. Together we might be able to build something that lasts longer than both of us. But it won't be easy, and it won't be gentle." Eleanor looked at him for another long moment, and Clayton saw the decision forming behind her eyes. Whatever life she'd left behind in Philadelphia, whatever pain had driven her to answer a telegram from a stranger in Montana territory, she was done running from it. Then let's not waste time pretending this is something it isn't. Take me to your ranch, Mr. Ashford. Show me what I'm supposed to save. The wagon ride from Helena to the Ashford Ranch took 3 hours, following a road that was more suggestion than reality, cutting through snow-covered valleys and along ridges where the wind tried to push them sideways into oblivion. Clayton drove in silence, his hands steady on the reins, his eyes on the terrain ahead. Beside him, Eleanor sat rigid, her body braced against the wagon's motion, her face turned toward the endless landscape that surrounded them. She'd grown up in Philadelphia, in narrow streets, where buildings blocked out the sky, where a person could walk for blocks without seeing horizon. Montana must have seemed like another world to her. The Bitterroot Mountains rose to the west like the spine of some sleeping god, snow-covered peaks catching the afternoon light and throwing it back in shades of pink and gold. To the east, the plains stretched away forever rolling grassland that would be green in summer, but now lay dormant under a blanket of snow that glittered like scattered diamonds. After an hour of silence, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was tight, controlled, fighting against something underneath. The doctors in Philadelphia were very specific about what was wrong with me. They examined me after my fiancé left me at the altar, said they wanted to understand why a man would make that choice, why he would publicly humiliate both of us rather than go through with the marriage. Clayton didn't look at her, but his hands tightened slightly on the reins. Keep talking. They said my uterus was tilted at an abnormal angle, that my pelvis, despite being wider than most women's, was shaped wrong. Too masculine, they said. They told me conception would be nearly impossible, and that even if I did conceive, my body would likely reject the pregnancy. Miscarriage in the first trimester, if not sooner. They recommended I make peace with a childless life. How many women with your bill did they examine before making that diagnosis? Eleanor went silent. Clayton could feel her thinking, could almost hear the gears turning as she revisited that humiliating examination with new eyes. I don't know. I never asked. None. Clayton finally looked at her, his eyes hard. Because you're unique, Eleanor. They looked at you and saw an anomaly, so they decided you must be defective. But they had no data to support that. They had their own prejudices and assumptions, and they called it science. But what if they were right? What if I am broken? Then we keep trying anyway. Clayton turned back to the road ahead, but his voice softened just slightly. I lost 3 children with Anna. 3 pregnancies that ended in blood and grief. The last one killed her. So I understand fear, Eleanor. I understand the terror of hope. But I also understand that doing nothing is the same as giving up. And I'm not ready to give up yet. They rode in silence for another mile before Eleanor spoke again, her voice barely audible over the wind and the creak of wagon wheels. Why me? You could have chosen anyone. Someone smaller, more conventionally attractive, someone without a diagnosis hanging over her head like a curse. Clayton was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. I buried Anna 2 years ago. Sweet, delicate little thing, barely 5 feet tall, with a laugh like wind chimes. She lasted 2 years in Montana before this land broke her. Lost 3 babies before they even quickened. The last one took her with it. I held her while she bled out, watched the light go out of her eyes, and I swore I would never make that mistake again. He pulled the wagon to a stop at the top of a ridge, turning to face Eleanor fully for the first time since leaving Helena. I need a woman who can match this land, who can work beside me when the ranch hands are sick or drunk or just plain gone, who can survive blizzards and droughts and all the other ways Montana tries to kill you. I need someone built for survival, Eleanor. And when I saw your photograph, when I read the note you sent with it, saying you were tired of apologizing for taking up space, I knew I'd found her. Eleanor's eyes were wet, but she didn't let the tears fall. What did my note say exactly? You said you'd been called a giant, a freak unwomanly by every person who was supposed to love you. You said you were done making yourself small to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you. You said if I wanted someone to work hard and ask for nothing, you could do that. But if I wanted someone to be grateful for the bare minimum, I should look elsewhere. I remember writing that. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. I was drunk when I wrote it. Thought about tearing it up the next morning. But I figured if it scared you off, you weren't worth meeting anyway. It didn't scare me. It gave me hope. Clayton picked up the reins again, urging the horses forward. Because a woman who's done apologizing for her strength is exactly what I need. Not someone who'll break under pressure, someone who'll stand beside me when everything goes to hell. And Eleanor, I need you to know that everything will go to hell. This isn't going to be easy. The Ashford Ranch appeared in the valley below them just as the sun was starting to set, painting everything in shades of orange and crimson. 5,000 acres of grassland timber stands along the creek. 3 barns and a main house built from local pine, weathered silver gray by years of sun and snow. It was beautiful in the way that hard things are beautiful, raw and uncompromising and utterly indifferent to human comfort. But it was the man standing on the front porch who caught Eleanor's attention first. Tall, thin, mid-30s, wearing an expensive suit that looked utterly out of place against the rough-hewn logs of the ranch house. He stood with his arms crossed, watching the wagon approach with eyes that held no welcome at all. "That's Marcus." Clayton's voice went flat, emotionless, the way a man's voice goes when he's looking at something that might kill him if he shows weakness. "My nephew. My brother Thomas's son. He's been waiting for me to die for 5 years now. Been circling this place like a vulture, just waiting for me to fail. Why is he here? Because the will says, if I die without a legitimate heir, everything goes to him. Thomas wrote it that way before he died, thinking I'd have children by now. But after Anna, after the losses, I couldn't bring myself to try again. Until I ran out of time." Eleanor studied Marcus as they drew closer. There was something desperate in the way he stood, something that went beyond simple greed. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was personal. Clayton brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Marcus descended the porch steps slowly, his eyes never leaving Eleanor. When he spoke, his voice was cultivated, educated, with an edge of cruelty underneath. "So, this is the mail-order bride. My God, Uncle Clayton, you weren't exaggerating in your telegram. She really is enormous. Philadelphia must have been thrilled to ship her off." Clayton was already moving, already stepping down from the wagon to put himself between Marcus and Eleanor, but Eleanor was faster. She stood up in the wagon bed, her height giving her an additional advantage, and looked down at Marcus with an expression of such withering disdain that he actually took a step backward. "I've grown accustomed to cruelty from small men." Her voice was cold, precise, cutting through the evening air like a blade. "I've learned that men who say cruel things loudly are usually men who have very little to say that matters. But let me be clear about something, Mr. Ashford." She stepped down from the wagon, her boots hitting the frozen ground with solid authority. Marcus had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe? Or the first stirring of fear. "I didn't come to Montana to be liked. I didn't come here to fit into your narrow definition of what a woman should be. I came here because your uncle needs an heir, and I need a place where strength matters more than appearance. And if that arrangement bothers you, if my presence here threatens whatever inheritance you've been counting on, well, that sounds like your problem, not mine." Marcus's face flushed red. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're standing on land that doesn't belong to you, wearing clothes that cost more than most men earn in a month, and looking at your uncle's house like it's already yours." Eleanor moved closer, and despite being a woman, despite having just stepped off a train after 3 days of travel, there was something formidable about her. "I grew up in Philadelphia. I know opportunists when I see them. And you, Mr. Ashford, are a textbook case." The front door opened before Marcus could respond. A woman in her mid-50s emerged, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple dress and apron. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, but not unkind. She took in the scene with the practiced ease of someone who'd seen plenty of conflict in her time. "That's enough, Marcus." Her voice carried authority that came from years of managing stubborn men and stubborn situations. "Get off this property before Clayton decides to help you along." "Mrs. Hayes." Clayton's voice held warmth for the first time since leaving Helena. "This is Eleanor Bradford, my wife as of tomorrow when we can get to a preacher." The woman. Mrs. Hayes studied Eleanor with eyes that missed nothing. Then she smiled just slightly and nodded. "You're built for the work." "Good. The last one wasn't." "Come inside, girl. You look half frozen." Marcus stood fuming on the porch as Eleanor followed Mrs. Hayes inside. Clayton lingered facing his nephew in the fading light. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The tension between them was old, complicated, weighted with history and grief and accusations that had never been fully voiced. Finally, Marcus broke the silence, his voice low and venomous. "She won't conceive. Philadelphia doctors said she's defective. And even if she does, Montana will kill her just like it killed Anna. You're wasting your last 6 months on a fantasy uncle. This ranch will be mine by August. Get off my land." Clayton's voice was soft, dangerous. "And Marcus, if you come near my wife, if you do anything to interfere with what we're building here, I won't wait for the lawyers. I'll end this myself. Do you understand me? You can't threaten me." That wasn't a threat. It was a promise. "Now get out before I make good on it." Marcus held his ground for another moment, then turned and walked to his horse tied at the hitching post. He mounted in a single smooth motion, the product of a lifetime around horses despite his city clothes. Before riding off, he looked back at Clayton one last time. "When she fails, when that baby dies or never exists at all, I'll be here to pick up the pieces. And you'll have no one to blame but yourself for gambling everything on a broken woman." He spurred his horse and disappeared into the gathering darkness. Clayton stood alone in the yard, his hands clenched into fists, his breath coming hard. Everything Marcus had said was possible. Eleanor might not conceive. She might miscarry. Montana might take her the way it had taken Anna. But doing nothing guaranteed failure. And Clayton Ashford had never been a man who chose guaranteed failure over dangerous hope. Inside the ranch house, Eleanor was learning the geography of her new life. The main room was large, dominated by a stone fireplace tall enough for a man to stand in. Rough-hewn beams crossed the ceiling, aged to the color of honey. The furniture was simple but well-made, built for utility rather than beauty. A large table near the kitchen. Chairs with solid arms and legs that wouldn't break under a working man's weight. Shelves lined with books, their spines cracked from reading. Mrs. Hayes moved through the space with practiced efficiency, lighting lamps as the last daylight faded from the windows. She spoke without looking at Eleanor, her voice matter-of-fact. "I've been running this house for 15 years. Came here when my husband died, needed work, and Thomas Ashford hired me on the spot. Been here through both wives, 3 stillborn babies, a brother's death, and more cattle drives than I care to count. So I've seen some things, girl. And I'll tell you straight because you look like someone who appreciates straight talk." Eleanor stood near the fireplace, warming her hands. "I do. Anna was a sweet child. Beautiful, gentle, educated. Everything a man could want in a wife by Eastern standards. But Montana doesn't care about Eastern standards. Montana cares about survival. And that girl wasn't built for it. Too small, too delicate, too afraid of everything this land demanded." Mrs. Hayes finally turned to face Eleanor fully. Her eyes were hard, but not unkind. "You're built different. Bigger, stronger, less likely to break in the first hard wind. But building and surviving aren't the same thing. Surviving means making hard choices, means standing your ground when everything in you wants to run, means loving a hard man in a hard place and not expecting it to be like the novels say." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I'm not looking for a novel. I'm looking for a place to stop apologizing for existing." "Then you might have found it. But Eleanor, you need to understand something about Clayton Ashford. He's a good man, but he's been broken by loss. Lost his father young. Lost his brother 10 years ago in a stampede. Lost his wife and 3 babies. And now he's facing losing everything Thomas built, everything Clayton's worked his whole life to preserve. He's desperate. And desperate men make hard choices. Like marrying a stranger and demanding she give him a child in 6 months. Mrs. Hayes smiled grimly. "Exactly like that. So you need to decide right now before you spend another minute in this house whether you can live with that kind of desperation. Because it won't get gentler, Eleanor. It'll only get harder." The front door opened and Clayton entered, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He stopped when he saw the 2 women facing each other, reading something in their postures. Mrs. Hayes nodded once, then turned back to the stove where something was simmering. "I'll have supper ready in 20 minutes. Eleanor, your room is upstairs, first door on the left. There's water for washing and clean clothes laid out. Take your time." Clayton watched Eleanor climb the stairs. her footsteps heavy on the wooden treads. When she disappeared from view, he turned to Mrs. Hayes. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That this won't be easy and you're desperate and she needs to decide if she can live with that." And she's still here, isn't she?" Supper was a quiet affair. The food was simple but good. Venison stew, fresh bread, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Eleanor ate with the appetite of someone who'd been traveling for 3 days on train food, but Clayton barely touched his plate. He sat at the head of the table, his eyes moving between Eleanor and the window, as if expecting Marcus to return or some other disaster to announce itself. Mrs. Hayes had excused herself after serving, disappearing into her own quarters off the kitchen. The silence in the main room grew heavy, weighted with everything that hadn't been said, everything that needed to be addressed before this night went any further. Finally, Eleanor set down her spoon and looked directly at Clayton. "I need to know what you expect from me. Not just the child, the everything else. Am I your wife in truth or just a breeding mare you're keeping until August?" Clayton's jaw tightened. He set down his own fork and met her eyes. "I expect honesty. I expect hard work because running this ranch takes everyone's effort. I expect you to learn the land, the animals, the way things work here. And yes, I expect you to share my bed every night until you conceive. But Eleanor, I need you to understand something." He stood up, moving to the fireplace, his back to her. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with an emotion he was trying to control. "I loved Anna. I tried to protect her, tried to keep her safe from everything that made Montana dangerous. And it didn't matter. She died anyway, and those 3 babies died with her, and I've spent 2 years wondering if I killed them by bringing them here, by thinking love was enough." He turned back to face Eleanor. "So no, you're not a breeding mare. But you're also not someone I can afford to love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because love didn't save Anna. Love didn't keep those babies alive. And I can't go through that again." Eleanor absorbed this in silence. Then she stood, moving around the table until she was facing him directly. In the firelight, her face was all planes and angles, strong rather than pretty, marked by years of hearing that she wasn't enough. "Good." Her voice was steady. "Because I'm not here for love either, Clayton. I'm here because I'm tired of being told my body is wrong. Tired of doctors and fiancés and well-meaning relatives explaining all the ways I'm defective. You're offering me a chance to prove them wrong. To prove that maybe my body knows something their science doesn't." She stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the wood smoke and leather and something else, something masculine and distinctly Clayton. "So here's what I propose. We do this honestly. We try for a baby because that's what we both need. But we don't pretend this is something it's not. No false romance, no lying to ourselves about what we're doing. Just 2 people trying to survive, trying to build something that lasts longer than our individual failures. And if you conceive, if the baby comes, then what? Then we figure it out together. But Clayton, I need you to promise me something. What if I fail? If my body really is broken, the way Philadelphia says you don't blame yourself. You don't carry that guilt the way you've been carrying guilt over Anna. We tried. We were honest. And sometimes honest effort isn't enough." Clayton studied her face for a long moment. In the firelight, with her hair coming loose from its pins and her traveling dress rumpled from the long journey, Eleanor Bradford looked nothing like the refined Eastern ladies who'd once caught his eye. But there was something about her, something that felt like bedrock, like Montana itself, solid and unbreakable and utterly trustworthy. "I can promise that." He extended his hand, formal, as if they were sealing a business arrangement. 6 months of honest effort, no lies, no false hope, just work and faith that maybe we're both stronger than we know. Eleanor took his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused in a way Anna's never had been. They shook once solemnly, sealing the arrangement that would either save them both or destroy what little remained. "Then let's not waste any more time." Eleanor's voice was steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Show me to our room, Clayton. Let's begin." The master bedroom was larger than Eleanor had expected, with a bed that could sleep 3 and heavy curtains that blocked out the mountain cold. A fireplace in the corner provided heat, the logs already laid and ready for lighting. Someone, probably Mrs. Hayes, had laid out a simple nightgown on the bed, white cotton, that looked like it had belonged to Anna. Eleanor stood in the doorway looking at that nightgown and felt something twist in her chest. She wasn't Anna, would never be Anna, but she was expected to wear Anna's clothes, sleep in Anna's bed, fill Anna's role without ever being allowed to be herself. That was her dress. Clayton's voice came from behind her, low and rough. I should have thought, should have realized. I can ask Mrs. Hayes to find something else. No. Eleanor stepped into the room, moving to the bed. She picked up the nightgown, holding it up to the light. It's too small. Even if I wanted to wear it, it wouldn't fit. She turned to face Clayton, who stood in the doorway, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. I'm not Anna Clayton. I'll never be delicate or small or any of the things she was. And if we're going to do this, if we're really going to try, you need to accept that. I'm not here to be her replacement. I'm here to be something different. I know that. But knowing and accepting are different things. Then let's start with acceptance. Eleanor began unbuttoning her traveling dress, her fingers steady despite her racing heart. I'll sleep in my chemise tonight. Tomorrow I'll sew something that fits. But right now we have a promise to keep. She let the dress fall, then the petticoats, until she stood in just her undergarments. In the firelight, her body was all solid muscle and practical strength, nothing delicate or ornamental about her. She was built like someone who could work from dawn to dusk, could lift and carry and endure. But there was beauty in that strength, a kind of magnificence that had nothing to do with conventional feminine ideals. Clayton stood frozen, his eyes tracking over her body with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. Then he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He moved to the fireplace, lighting the prepared logs, buying himself time to find words. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. I told you this wouldn't be gentle, that I'd be honest about what I need. But Eleanor, I need you to know that this doesn't disgust me. You don't disgust me. Everything Philadelphia told you was wrong. He turned to face her fully. You're magnificent, built exactly the way you should be. And if we do this, if we try to make a child tonight, it's not because I'm settling for you. It's because you're exactly what I've been hoping for. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough over the years. Cried when boys in school called her names. Cried when her fiancé left her at the altar, his face twisted with revulsion. Cried when doctors examined her like she was a specimen, something to be studied and diagnosed, and ultimately dismissed as defective. She was done crying, done apologizing, done making herself small. Then stop talking and show me. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. You said you wouldn't stop until your child was in my womb, so don't stop, Clayton. Give me a reason to believe this was worth leaving everything behind. What happened next wasn't romantic in any conventional sense. There was no slow seduction, no pretty words whispered in the darkness. Clayton approached her like a man with a mission, methodical and determined, and Eleanor met him with equal determination. They came together on that bed, not as lovers, but as allies, two desperate people trying to create something neither of them could make alone. But in the raw honesty of it, in the absence of pretense or performance, something unexpected happened. Eleanor felt Clayton's hands on her body, calloused and strong and utterly certain, and instead of shame, she felt seen. He didn't close his eyes, didn't pretend she was someone else. He looked at her, really looked, and his desire was genuine, undeniable, impossible to fake. And when Clayton spoke, when he said those words that should have sounded crude or degrading, they landed differently than Eleanor had expected. Open your legs. His voice was rough against her ear, his body heavy and warm above hers. I won't stop until my child is in your womb. That's not a demand, Eleanor. It's a promise. I promise to keep trying, to never make you feel less than worthy, to believe in you even when you can't believe in yourself. Eleanor's hands gripped his shoulders, her nails digging into muscle and bone, and something broke open inside her. Not pleasure, not yet, but something more fundamental. Permission. Permission to be exactly who she was. Permission to take up space. Permission to be wanted, not despite her strength, but because of it. The mechanics of what they did were simple biological, the same act humans had been performing since the dawn of time. But the meaning underneath was more complex. This was survival. This was hope. This was two broken people trying to build something unbreakable. Afterward they lay side by side in the darkness, not touching, both breathing hard. The fire had burned down to embers, casting shifting shadows across the ceiling. Outside, the Montana wind howled against the windows, testing every seal, looking for ways inside. Eleanor spoke first, her voice quiet but steady. "Do you think it worked? Tonight, I mean. Do you think we made a baby?" Clayton was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out in the darkness, finding her hand, gripping it with surprising gentleness. "I don't know, but whether it did or didn't, we keep trying, every night, until it takes or we run out of time. That was the deal. That was the deal." Eleanor squeezed his hand back. "And Clayton, about earlier, what Marcus said about me being defective, do you really believe Philadelphia was wrong, or are you just hoping they were?" He turned on his side to face her, his eyes reflecting the last of the firelight. "I believe your body is capable of things those doctors never imagined. I believe you're built to survive in ways Anna wasn't. But Eleanor, hope and belief aren't the same thing. I'm choosing to have faith in you. That's all any of us can do. Choose faith over fear." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd been maintaining since Philadelphia crumbling just slightly. This man, this stranger she'd married for convenience and survival, was offering her something no one else ever had. Not love, not yet, but something more valuable. Trust. Faith in her body, her strength, her fundamental worthiness. She rolled toward him, bringing their bodies close for the first time since they'd finished. "Get some rest, Clayton. Tomorrow I'll start earning my keep. Show you I'm worth the gamble." Clayton's arm came around her waist, heavy and warm and anchoring. "You already have, Eleanor. You showed up. That's more than I had any right to expect." They fell asleep like that, two strangers holding each other against the Montana cold, against the weight of expectation, against the fear that maybe this desperate gamble would end like all the others, in blood and disappointment and fresh graves in the cemetery behind the house. But for tonight, they had hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. And sometimes hope is all you need to make it to morning. Dawn came to Montana territory the way it always did, sudden and absolute, washing away the protective darkness and exposing everything to harsh mountain light. Eleanor woke first, her body aching in unfamiliar ways, the weight of Clayton's arm still heavy across her waist. For a disorienting moment she forgot where she was, forgot the choices that had brought her here. Then memory flooded back, and with it a strange mixture of relief and terror. She was married. To a man she barely knew, in a place she'd never seen before yesterday. And somewhere deep inside her body, possibly impossibly, there might already be the beginning of a child. Clayton stirred beside her, his breathing changing as consciousness returned. His arm tightened briefly around her waist before he pulled it back, suddenly aware of the intimacy, the strangeness of waking next to someone new. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling beams. "How do you feel?" His voice was rough with sleep, carefully neutral, as if he was trying not to impose expectations on her answer. "Sore, uncertain, alive." Eleanor sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. The room was cold, the fire having died completely during the night. "And you, hopeful, which is dangerous." He swung his legs out of bed, his back to her, and Eleanor found herself studying the map of scars across his shoulders. Old injuries, the kind that came from a lifetime of physical work. A long, pale line along his left shoulder blade. Round, puckered marks that might have been burns. The body of a man who'd survived by being tougher than whatever tried to kill him. "I'll get the fire started." Clayton reached for his clothes, pulling on pants and a shirt with efficient movements. "Mrs. Hayes will have breakfast ready soon. Ranch work starts early here. If you're planning to pull your weight, you should know that." There was no meanness in his words, just statement of fact. Eleanor nodded, reaching for her own clothes, yesterday's traveling dress, wrinkled but serviceable. "I didn't come here to be decorative. Show me what needs doing and I'll do it." Clayton paused in the doorway, looking back at her. His expression was complicated, something between gratitude and uncertainty, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. There's riding clothes in the closet, Anna's, but they might fit you better than that dress. We'll be checking fence lines today, making sure the winter didn't destroy anything critical. Can you ride? I grew up around horses. My father owned a stable before he died and left us with nothing but debts. Eleanor moved to the closet, finding leather riding pants and a heavy wool shirt. They'd be tight but workable. I can ride. Good. Meet me downstairs in 20 minutes. He left his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Eleanor dressed quickly, braiding her hair back with practiced efficiency. The riding clothes were snug across her hips and shoulders, made for a smaller woman, but they'd do. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the reflection. Not the refined Philadelphia lady she'd been trained to be. Something rougher, more honest, maybe more real. Downstairs, Mrs. Hayes had breakfast laid out on the long table. Eggs, bacon, thick slices of bread, coffee that could wake the dead. Eleanor sat and ate with focus, aware that she'd need the fuel for whatever physical labor lay ahead. Clayton ate across from her, their eyes meeting occasionally, but neither speaking. The silence wasn't hostile, just cautious. Two people learning each other's rhythms. The back door opened and a man entered, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He was perhaps 30, with copper skin and dark eyes that assessed Eleanor with frank curiosity. He wore work clothes like Clayton's, his long black hair pulled back in a practical tie. "This is Danny Two Rivers," Clayton gestured with his coffee cup. "Best ranch hand I've ever had. Works harder than 3 men and complains less than any of them." Danny's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Boss, I think you're confusing not complaining with not wasting breath on things that won't change." He turned his attention to Eleanor, his gaze direct but not disrespectful. "You're the one from Philadelphia, the one who answered Clayton's telegram." "I am." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "I hope I'm what he needed. Time will tell." Danny poured himself coffee, leaning against the counter. "No offense meant, but we've been through this before. Anna was a sweet woman, kind heart, but Montana ate her alive. Boss needs someone who won't break. I don't intend to break." Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't come all this way to fail." Danny studied her for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Welcome to Ashford Ranch." "Mrs. Ashford, try to keep up today. Boss doesn't slow down for anyone." The morning was spent riding fence lines, checking for breaks and weak points, clearing debris that winter storms had piled against the posts. Eleanor had been honest about her riding skills. She'd spent her childhood years around horses before her father's death and the financial collapse that followed. But Philadelphia riding, controlled trots through manicured parks, was nothing like Montana riding. Here the horses were working animals, tough and pragmatic. The terrain was unforgiving, full of hidden gullies and rocks that could snap a horse's leg if you weren't paying attention. And the work was endless, repetitive, demanding constant focus, despite numbing cold and wind that cut through even heavy coats. Eleanor kept pace. When Clayton pointed to a section of fence that needed repair, she dismounted and helped without being asked, her hands clumsy at first with unfamiliar tools, but learning quickly. When they stopped to rest the horses, she didn't complain about exhaustion or cold, just accepted the canteen Clayton offered and drank deeply before passing it back. Danny rode a parallel section with 2 other ranch handsmen Eleanor hadn't met yet, but who watched her with open curiosity. She could feel their eyes, could sense them making judgments. The new wife, the giant woman from back east. Would she last a week, a month? Or would she be gone by spring, like so many others who'd tried to tame Montana and failed? Late morning brought them to a high ridge overlooking the main valley where the ranch buildings sat small and distant. Clayton reined in his horse, his eyes scanning the landscape with the careful attention of someone reading a language most people couldn't see. He pointed to distant dark shapes moving across the snow. Elk herd. They come down from the high country when winter gets bad. We leave them alone mostly, but if the cattle are struggling, sometimes we have to cull the herd to protect grazing land. He glanced at Eleanor, his expression unreadable. "You know how to shoot pistols a little. My brother taught me before he died, but not rifles. I'll teach you. Everyone on this ranch needs to know how to handle a gun, not just for hunting, for protection. Protection from what Eleanor's hand tightened on her reins. Marcus Clayton's jaw tensed. Marcus maybe, but also wolves, mountain lions, the occasional drifter who doesn't understand that isolated ranch houses aren't easy targets. This isn't Philadelphia, Eleanor. The law is 3 hours away on a good day. Out here, you're your own protection. They rode in silence for another mile before Eleanor spoke again, her voice careful. Tell me about Thomas, about what happened between you and Marcus. Clayton didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, his body swaying naturally with his horse's gait. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. Thomas was my older brother, 5 years older. He protected me when we were kids, when our father would come home drunk and angry. Thomas would put himself between us, take beatings meant for me. I loved him more than anyone. He paused, struggling with memory. After our mother died, Thomas inherited the ranch. He was 22, I was 17. He got married a year later to a woman named Catherine, sweet girl from Helena. They had Marcus 9 months later, and Catherine died in childbirth. Eleanor's chest tightened, just like Anna almost did, just like Anna did. Clayton's voice went flat. Thomas never recovered from Catherine's death, started drinking to numb the pain, tried to be a father to Marcus, but he was drowning in grief and whiskey. By the time Marcus was 10, Thomas was drunk more often than sober. What happened to him? To Thomas Stampede, 10 years ago. We were moving cattle to winter pasture. Thomas had been drinking, shouldn't have been riding. He saw the herd starting to panic, saw them heading toward a ravine. He rode into the middle of them, trying to turn them. I screamed at him to get out to let the cattle go. He ignored me. Clayton's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. By the time I got to him, he was already dying, trampled, broken. I held him while he bled out. His last words were asking me to take care of Marcus, to not let the boy become like him. I promised I would. But Marcus blames you. Eleanor understood now. He thinks you could have saved Thomas, but didn't. He thinks I let Thomas die so I could inherit the ranch, that I stood by and watched while his father rode to his death. And nothing I say, no amount of truth, will change what he believes. So he spent 10 years watching me, waiting for me to fail, planning how he'll take back what he thinks I stole. Will he actually try to harm us? To harm the baby? If there is one? Clayton finally looked at her, his eyes dark with something that might have been fear. I don't know, but I'm not willing to find out, which is why you need to learn to shoot. Why you need to understand that this isn't just about making a child, it's about protecting what we build. They continued riding, checking more fence marking sections that would need serious repair come spring. The sun climbed higher, but brought little warmth. Eleanor's hands were numb inside her gloves, her face raw from wind. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to turn back. She'd meant what she said. She hadn't come to Montana to be decorative or delicate. She'd come to prove she could survive. It was mid-afternoon when they returned to the ranch house. Danny and the other hands had finished their sections and were already working in the barn, repairing tack and equipment. Mrs. Hayes met them at the door with hot coffee and the news that caught both Clayton and Eleanor off guard. Marcus was here while you were out. Brought 2 men with him. I didn't let them in the house, but they waited on the porch for near an hour before giving up and leaving. Clayton's expression went dangerous. What did he want? Didn't say. Just kept asking when you'd be back, if Mrs. Ashford was settling in all right, if there was any news yet. Mrs. Hayes's eyes were sharp with concern. Clayton, that boy is planning something. I've seen that look before, right before he does something stupid. Did he threaten you? Not in words. But the men he brought, they weren't the usual Helena drifters looking for work. They were professionals, the kind you hire when you need something ugly done but don't want to do it yourself. Eleanor felt ice in her stomach. Professional what hired guns? Maybe. Or arsonists. Or worse. Mrs. Hayes looked at Eleanor directly. Girl, you need to understand something. Marcus has been waiting 5 years for Clayton to die naturally. Now that you're here, now that there's a chance of an heir, he knows his time is running out. Desperate men do desperate things. Clayton moved to the gun cabinet in the corner, unlocking it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. He pulled out a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver, checking both with the practiced ease of someone who'd been handling firearms his entire life. "Eleanor, starting tomorrow, you wear this." He held out the revolver. "I'll teach you to use it properly, but even just carrying it might make someone think twice." Eleanor took the weapon, feeling the cold weight of it in her hand. In Philadelphia, ladies didn't touch guns, didn't think about violence or protection. They relied on men and law and the thin veneer of civilization to keep them safe. But this wasn't Philadelphia, and Eleanor Bradford Ashford was done being the kind of woman who needed protecting. "Show me how to load it." Her voice was steady. "Show me everything I need to know." That evening, after a dinner eaten in tense silence, Clayton took Eleanor out behind the barn where they'd set up targets against a dirt berm. The revolver felt heavy in her hand, awkward, like holding something alive and dangerous that might turn on her at any moment. Clayton stood behind her, his body close, his hands guiding hers into the proper grip. His voice was patient, methodical, the voice of someone who'd taught this lesson before. "Never point it at anything you don't intend to kill. Finger stays off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Aim for center mass, not headshots like they do in dime novels. You want the biggest target, the highest chance of stopping a threat." He stepped back, watching as Eleanor raised the gun with both hands, sighting down the barrel at the target 20 feet away. Her hands were shaking slightly from cold and nerves and the weight of what she was learning. "Breathe out and squeeze. Don't pull. Squeeze gentle." Eleanor squeezed. The gun roared, kicking back hard enough to jar her shoulders. The target remained pristine, untouched. She'd missed completely. Again. Clayton's voice was calm, unsurprised. "You're anticipating the recoil. Trust the gun. Trust yourself." 6 more shots. 3 of them hit the target, though none near the center. But it was progress. By the time the cylinder was empty, Eleanor's hands had stopped shaking. She was starting to understand the weapon, to feel how it wanted to move where it needed to be pointed, to send lead where she intended. Better. Clayton reloaded the revolver with smooth efficiency. Practice every day, morning and evening, until shooting becomes instinct, not thought. They stood in the gathering darkness, the mountains black shapes against a purple sky, and Eleanor felt the strangeness of her new reality settle over her like a physical weight. 2 days ago, she'd been in Philadelphia working at a textile mill, sleeping in a boarding house room barely big enough to turn around in. Now she was in Montana territory, married to a stranger, learning to shoot because her new husband's nephew might try to kill them both. "Clayton, what if I can't do this?" Her voice was quiet, but the question was genuine. "What if I'm not strong enough for this life?" He looked at her in the dimness, his face half-shadowed. "You rode fence lines today without complaining. You hit a target 3 times on your first time shooting. You stood up to Marcus yesterday when most women would have hidden behind their husband. Eleanor, you're already doing it." But the baby. What if Philadelphia was right? What if my body really can't carry a child? Clayton reached out and took the revolver from her hand, securing it carefully. Then he turned to face her fully. "Then we keep trying until we run out of time." "But Eleanor, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about producing an heir anymore. Not for me. You came here and you're trying, really trying, and that matters. Whether we succeed or not, that effort matters. What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe I was wrong to think of this as purely transactional. Maybe there's something else building here. Respect, maybe. Partnership. The beginnings of something that could become more than just survival." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Are you saying you're starting to care?" "Because, Clayton, I can't afford to care. I can't afford to hope for more than what we agreed to. Hope is what destroys you when things fall apart." "I know." His voice was rough. "God knows I know. But it's happening anyway. And I don't know how to stop it." They stood there in the darkness, 2 people who'd promised not to want more than survival, both feeling the foundations of that promise starting to crack, and neither knowing whether that cracking would save them or destroy them. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm. Eleanor woke before dawn, worked alongside Clayton and the ranch hands until dark, practiced shooting morning and evening, fell into bed exhausted. Her body adjusted to the demands muscles she'd forgotten she had, growing harder, stronger. Her hands developed new calluses. Her face lost its Philadelphia pallor, tanned by sun and wind, and every night Clayton came to their bed and they tried again. Sometimes quick and mechanical, both too exhausted for anything else. Sometimes slower, more careful, as if they were learning a language neither had spoken before. The act itself became less strange, less awkward. But the meaning underneath kept shifting, becoming more complicated. 3 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor woke feeling different. Not sick exactly, just off. A subtle nausea that faded when she ate, a tenderness in her breasts, a fatigue that went deeper than simple overwork. She said nothing, didn't want to give voice to hope that might be false. The doctors in Philadelphia had been so certain. Tilted uterus, narrow pelvis, conception unlikely, carrying to term nearly impossible. Why would 3 weeks in Montana change fundamental biology? But her monthly bleeding didn't come. 1 week late became 2. The nausea persisted, especially in the mornings. And the exhaustion. God, the exhaustion that hit her every afternoon like a physical blow, making her need to sit down even in the middle of work. Mrs. Hayes noticed first. She'd seen pregnancy enough times to recognize the signs. She cornered Eleanor in the kitchen one morning, her voice low and urgent. "How late are you?" Eleanor's hands stilled on the bread dough she'd been kneading. "What's your monthly?" "How late?" "6 weeks." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe 7. I wasn't regular before, so I thought maybe it was just stress from the move, from everything." Mrs. Hayes nodded slowly. "And the morning sickness, the fatigue every day. But that could be from working harder than I ever have, from adjusting to the altitude, from anything. It could be." Mrs. Hayes's hand covered Eleanor's, stilling the nervous kneading. "Or it could be that your body is doing exactly what Clayton hoped it would. Have you told him?" "No. I can't. Not yet. What if I'm wrong? What if I tell him and then I lose it like Anna did? I can't give him hope just to take it away." Mrs. Hayes squeezed her hand gently. "Girl, he's going to notice eventually. Better he hears it from you than figures it out on his own and wonders why you were hiding it." That night, Eleanor stood at the bedroom window watching the sun set behind the mountains, one hand pressed unconsciously to her still, flat stomach. Behind her, she heard Clayton enter the room, heard the familiar sounds of him preparing for bed. She should tell him, should give voice to the possibility that was growing inside her. But fear kept her silent. What if Philadelphia had been right? What if her body could conceive but not carry? What if right now, right this moment, she was carrying a child that would never be born, that would end in blood and grief and Clayton's hope dying all over again? "You're thinking too loud." Clayton's voice came from the bed. "I can hear it from here." Eleanor turned to face him. He was sitting on the edge of the mattress, his shirt unbuttoned, his face tired but open. In the lamplight he looked younger than 42, or maybe just more vulnerable. "I'm late." The words came out before she could stop them. 6 weeks late, maybe more. And I've been sick every morning, and tired in a way that's different from just working hard. Clayton froze. His expression went through a rapid series of changes. Shock, hope, fear, a desperate kind of joy that was painful to witness. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, as if saying it aloud would make it true. "Maybe." Eleanor's voice cracked. "Or maybe my body is playing tricks. Or maybe I can conceive but not carry like Anna." "Clayton, I can't know yet, and I can't let myself believe until I know for certain." He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands framing her face, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. "Eleanor, listen to me. Whether this works or not, you've already given me more than Anna could. You're still here, still strong, still standing. That alone is a miracle. But what if I lose it? What if Philadelphia was right and my body rejects the pregnancy?" "Then we try again." His thumbs traced her cheekbones with surprising gentleness. "We keep trying until it works, or we run out of time. But Eleanor, you need to stop carrying Philadelphia's judgment like it's prophecy. Your body is not broken. It's doing exactly what it should. How can you be so certain? Because I've watched you for 3 weeks. Watched you work harder than most men. Watched you adapt to this place like you were born for it. Watched your body get stronger, not weaker. A broken woman couldn't do what you're doing. So no, I don't believe Philadelphia. I believe in you. Eleanor felt tears spill over hot against her cold cheeks. I'm scared, Clayton. I'm so scared of failing you. You couldn't fail me if you tried. He pulled her against his chest, his arms solid around her. You showed up. You're trying. That's all I ever asked for. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other against fear and hope and all the ways the future could go wrong. Outside, the Montana wind howled. Inside, something fragile and precious was trying to take root, and neither of them knew yet whether it would survive. The weeks between Eleanor's pregnancy announcement and the doctor's confirmation passed in careful vigilance. At 12 weeks, Eleanor's morning sickness intensified. At 14 weeks, the first subtle swell appeared in her belly. At 16 weeks, she felt the first flutter barely there, like butterfly wings against her palm. And at 18 weeks, when Dr. Mitchell rode out from Helena for a scheduled examination, Clayton held his breath, waiting for the news that would either vindicate his faith or confirm his deepest fears. The confirmation came 3 weeks later, delivered by Dr. Mitchell, who rode out from Helena at Clayton's urgent request. The doctor was a weathered man in his 60s, with hands that had delivered more babies than he could count, and eyes that had seen enough death to make him skeptical of hope. He examined Eleanor in the bedroom while Clayton paced downstairs, his boots wearing a path in the floorboards, his coffee growing cold in his cup. When Dr. Mitchell finally descended the stairs, his expression was carefully neutral. Clayton stopped pacing, his entire body tensed for bad news. He'd lived through this before, the cautious optimism, the gentle warnings, the eventual confirmation that hope had been premature, that Anna's body was rejecting another pregnancy, that they should prepare themselves for loss. But Dr. Mitchell's words were different this time. She's pregnant, about 20 weeks along. We're halfway there, I'd estimate. Heartbeat is strong. Mrs. Ashford's body is responding well to the pregnancy. No signs of distress or abnormality. Clayton had to sit down. His legs simply gave out, depositing him in the nearest chair with enough force to make it creak. Danny Two Rivers, who'd been hovering near the kitchen, stepped forward with concern. "Boss? You all right?" Clayton's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table, trying to still them, trying to process what he'd just heard. "She's really pregnant. The baby is healthy. As far as I can tell, yes." Dr. Mitchell poured himself coffee, his movements deliberate. "But Clayton, you need to understand something. We're in the 2nd trimester now, which is safer, but there are still risks ahead. Mrs. Ashford is strong, much stronger than Anna was, but that doesn't guarantee an easy pregnancy. There are still things that could go wrong." What did Philadelphia say about her? What was their diagnosis? Dr. Mitchell pulled a folded paper from his bag. This arrived 2 days ago, medical records from a Dr. Whitmore in Philadelphia. He claims Mrs. Ashford has a severely tilted uterus, abnormally narrow pelvis, and poor muscle tone in the uterine walls. He recommends against pregnancy, citing high risk of miscarriage and maternal mortality during childbirth. Clayton's jaw tightened. "And what do you say I say Dr. Whitmore is a damn fool who examined a woman who didn't fit his narrow definition of normal and decided she must be defective?" Mitchell tossed the paper onto the table with disgust. "I examined your wife, Clayton. Her uterus is positioned normally. Her pelvis is wide, probably wider than any woman I've examined in 30 years of practice. If anything, she's built perfectly for childbearing. Philadelphia's diagnosis is garbage." The relief that flooded through Clayton was so intense it was almost painful. He dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking with emotion he couldn't quite control. Danny moved away quietly, giving him privacy. Mrs. Hayes appeared from the kitchen, her eyes wet, understanding without being told that something fundamental had just shifted. Dr. Mitchell let him have his moment, then spoke more gently. "Clayton, I need you to listen carefully. Your wife is healthy, and the baby is healthy right now. But we're in Montana territory. The nearest hospital is 3 hours away in good weather, which means if something goes wrong during delivery, we're on our own. I need Mrs. Ashford to rest more, work less. I need you to keep stress to a minimum, and I need you both to understand that we're not out of danger yet." "I understand." Clayton's voice was rough but steady. "What do I need to do?" "Keep her fed, keep her warm. Don't let her lift anything heavy or work to exhaustion. And Clayton, there's one more thing. What Marcus Ashford visited my office in Helena yesterday, brought those Philadelphia medical records himself, wanted me to confirm that Mrs. Ashford's pregnancy was likely to fail, wanted documentation he could use to challenge your will. I refused, but you should know he's actively working against you." Clayton's moment of joy hardened into something colder, more dangerous. "What exactly did he say? That you were an old man clinging to false hope? That the mail-order bride you'd imported was damaged goods who'd never carry a child to term? That by August, when the baby fails to materialize or dies in delivery, the ranch should rightfully pass to him?" Mitchell's eyes were hard. "I told him to get out of my office. Told him if he showed his face again, I'd have the sheriff throw him in jail for harassment. But Clayton, that boy, is desperate. And desperate men are unpredictable." "I know." Clayton stood his hand steady now, his purpose clear. "Thank you for coming, Doctor. What do I owe you?" "Consider it paid. Just name the baby after me if it's a boy." Mitchell smiled grimly. "And keep that woman safe. She's 1 in a million." After the doctor left, Clayton climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling weighted with significance. At the bedroom door he paused, listening. He could hear Eleanor moving around inside, the rustle of fabric, the soft pad of bare feet on wooden floors. He knocked gently. Eleanor's voice called for him to enter. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her undergarments, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was pale but composed, eyes dry but red-rimmed. She looked up as he entered, and something in her expression broke his heart. "He told you." Her voice was flat. "The baby is real. The baby is real." Clayton crossed to her, kneeling, so he was looking up at her instead of down. "And healthy. And Eleanor, everything Philadelphia told you was wrong. Dr. Mitchell confirmed it. Your body is perfect. You're built for this." Eleanor's composure cracked. She bent forward, her face in her hands, and sobbed. Not delicate tears, but great wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. Clayton wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried out years of shame and doubt and the crushing weight of being told she was fundamentally broken. "I was so sure they were right." Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I was so sure my body would fail. That I'd conceive and then lose it and prove everyone right about me being defective. You're not defective, you're magnificent. And in 7 months you're going to hold our baby and prove every single person who doubted you absolutely wrong." They stayed like that until Eleanor's sobs quieted into hiccups, then into steady breathing. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were swollen, but something in her expression had changed. The fear was still there, but it had company now. Hope. Fierce, dangerous hope. "What did the doctor say about Marcus?" "I heard voices downstairs." Clayton's expression darkened. He told her everything. About Marcus bringing the Philadelphia records to Helena. About Marcus openly planning for the pregnancy to fail. About the implicit threat in every word and action. Eleanor's hands moved to her stomach, protective and possessive. "He's going to try something. You know that, right? He won't just wait and hope I miscarry naturally. He's going to try to make it happen." "I know. Which is why from now on you don't go anywhere alone. Not to the barn, not to the outhouse, nowhere. And that revolver I gave you, you carry it everywhere." "Clayton, I'm 9 weeks pregnant and learning to shoot. I'm not exactly a formidable defense. You're more formidable than you think. And Eleanor, I need you to promise me something. What if Marcus comes here while I'm gone? If he tries anything, you shoot him. Don't hesitate. Don't give him a chance to talk. You protect yourself and that baby no matter what it takes." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "I promise. But Clayton, you need to promise me something too. Anything." If something happens to me, if the pregnancy goes wrong, or Marcus succeeds, or Montana kills me like it killed Anna, you don't blame yourself. You don't carry that guilt. We tried. We were honest. Sometimes that's not enough. Clayton's hands framed her face, his thumbs tracing the strong line of her jaw. Nothing is going to happen to you. I won't allow it. You can't control everything. Watch me try. The next 3 months passed in a state of heightened alertness. Clayton hired 2 additional ranch hands, men Danny vouched for, whose primary job was watching the approaches to the ranch house. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed normally, her belly swelling steadily, the baby's kicks growing strong enough that Clayton could feel them when he placed his hand against her stomach at night. But the sense of threat never dissipated. Small things kept happening. Fences cut during the night, letting cattle wander onto neighboring land. A barn door left open, allowing horses to escape. Feed poisoned, killing 3 valuable breeding mares before anyone realized what was happening. Nothing could be definitively tied to Marcus. He'd stopped visiting the ranch, stopped making overt threats. But his absence was somehow more menacing than his presence had been. He was out there watching, waiting, planning something bigger. Eleanor continued working through more carefully now, conscious of the life growing inside her. She helped Mrs. Hayes with cooking and preserving food for winter. She practiced shooting daily, her aim improving until she could hit center mass 8 times out of 10. And she learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of work that kept 5,000 acres running. At 22 weeks, the baby turned breech. Dr. Mitchell discovered it during a routine examination, his face going carefully blank as he palpated Eleanor's swollen belly. "What is it?" Eleanor's voice was tight with fear. "Something's wrong. Baby is positioned wrong. Feet first instead of head first. It happens sometimes, especially this early. Baby might turn on its own before delivery, but if it doesn't, we'll have a difficult birth ahead of us." How difficult? Dr. Mitchell glanced at Clayton, who stood by the window, his back rigid with tension. "Breech births are dangerous. High risk of cord prolapse, which can strangle the baby during delivery. High risk of maternal hemorrhage. If the baby doesn't turn by week 36, I'll need to attempt to manually turn it. And if that doesn't work, we may need to consider cesarean section." Eleanor's hands went to her belly, protective and terrified. "What are the survival rates for cesarean?" "For the baby, 70% may be better. For the mother," Dr. Mitchell's expression was grim, 50-50 at best. "The surgery itself isn't the problem. It's infection afterward. Most women who survive the operation die within a week from sepsis." The silence in the room was absolute. Clayton still hadn't turned from the window. Eleanor could see his reflection in the glass, could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip he had on the window frame. "There has to be another option." Her voice was steady, despite the terror coursing through her. "I didn't come all this way to die on a surgeon's table. We pray the baby turns." Dr. Mitchell began packing his bag. "We give it time. Sometimes babies flip at the last moment. And Mrs. Ashford, you need to stop working so hard. Rest more. Let your body focus on the pregnancy instead of hauling water and chopping wood." After the doctor left, Eleanor and Clayton sat in silence. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of amber. Outside they could hear Danny and the ranch hands working the normal sounds of ranch life, continuing despite the catastrophe unfolding inside. Finally, Clayton spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't lose you. I thought I could do this again. Thought I could watch another woman risk her life for a child. But Eleanor, I can't. If it comes down to choosing between you and the baby, I choose you." Eleanor stood, moving to where he sat. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You don't get to make that choice. This is my body, my risk. And Clayton, I've spent my entire life being told I'm not enough, not woman enough, not worthy enough. This baby is proof that they were all wrong. I'm not giving up on that, even if it kills you. Even then." Eleanor's voice was fierce. "I'd rather die proving Philadelphia wrong than live knowing I was too scared to try." Clayton pulled her into his arms, burying his face against her swollen belly. Through the fabric of her dress, he could feel the baby kick strong and insistent. This child conceived in desperation and carried through fear was real, alive, fighting to be born. And above them both, Eleanor stood like Montana timber, unbending in the face of storm. The crisis came at 30 weeks. Eleanor woke in the middle of the night to wetness between her legs. Not blood, thank God, but amniotic fluid. Her water had broken 6 weeks too early, and the contraction started almost immediately. Clayton. Her voice was calm despite the panic clawing at her chest. "Wake up. The baby is coming." He was awake and moving before she finished speaking, pulling on clothes, lighting lamps, running for Mrs. Hayes. Within minutes, the house was alive with activity. Danny rode hard for Helena to fetch Dr. Mitchell. Mrs. Hayes boiled water and prepared the bedroom. Clayton paced like a caged animal, his face gray with fear. Eleanor labored through the rest of the night and into the morning. The contractions were strong, regular, relentless. But the baby wasn't descending. Breech presentation meant feet first, and feet couldn't dilate the cervix the way a head could. Eleanor could push until she passed out, and nothing would change. Dr. Mitchell arrived at dawn, his face grave when he examined her. "We need to make a decision. The baby needs to come out soon, or we'll lose both of you. I can try to manually turn it, but at this point, with the water already broken, it's risky. Or we do the cesarean. No surgery." Eleanor's voice was hoarse from hours of labor. "Turn the baby. Mrs. Ashford, if this doesn't work, we're out of options." "Then it has to work." What followed was the most excruciating pain Eleanor had ever experienced. Dr. Mitchell's hands pressed against her swollen belly, pushing, manipulating, trying to force the baby to flip. Eleanor screamed, her hands gripping the bed frame so hard the wood cracked. Clayton held her shoulders, whispering words she couldn't hear over her own cries. And then, miracle of miracles, she felt it. A sudden shift, a rolling sensation, and the pressure changed. The baby had turned, head first. Dr. Mitchell's voice was triumphant. "She's in position. Mrs. Ashford, when the next contraction comes, you push. Push like your life depends on it." Eleanor pushed. Through pain that whited out everything else. Through exhaustion that made her muscles scream. Through fear that the baby was too early, too small, wouldn't survive. She pushed until she felt something give way, until she heard Dr. Mitchell say the words she'd been desperate to hear. "The head is out. One more push. Give me one more." Eleanor gathered every remaining ounce of strength and pushed. She felt the baby slide free, felt the sudden emptiness in her belly, and then heard the most beautiful sound in the world. A baby crying. Thin, reedy, but unmistakably alive. "It's a girl." Dr. Mitchell's voice was rough with emotion, small but breathing. "Mrs. Ashford, you have a daughter." Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, too exhausted to cry, too stunned to process. Clayton was beside her, his face wet with tears, his hands shaking as Dr. Mitchell placed the tiny infant on Eleanor's chest. She was impossibly small, barely 5 pounds, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that worked overtime. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her fists waving in indignation at being pulled from the warm darkness into cold light. But she was alive, fighting, a survivor already. "Grace." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Her name is Grace." Clayton's hand covered hers where they cradled their daughter. Grace Clayton Ashford, Montana timber from the start. The joy lasted exactly 4 hours. Long enough for Eleanor to sleep, for Grace to nurse weekly, for Clayton to sit by the bed and watch his wife and daughter with an expression of wonder. Long enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd made it through the worst. What Clayton and Eleanor didn't know was that Danny Two Rivers hadn't just ridden for Dr. Mitchell when Eleanor went into labor. He'd also sent word to Sheriff Dawson in Helena, telling him that Marcus had been making threats for months that violence was coming and that the Ashford Ranch needed the law's protection. Dawson had assembled a posse and ridden hard through the night, arriving just as Marcus's men set the first fires. Then the window shattered. Clayton was on his feet instantly, his body covering Eleanor and the baby. Glass rained down across the bedroom floor, glittering in the afternoon light. and through the broken window came a voice they both recognized. "Uncle Clayton, time to settle accounts." Marcus stood in the yard below, flanked by 3 men, all of them armed, all of them looking up at the bedroom window with expressions that promised violence. "You have something that belongs to me, that ranch, that legacy, and I'm not waiting until August to claim it." Clayton moved to the window, keeping low, keeping his body between his family and the men below. "Marcus, you don't want to do this. There's still time to walk away." "Walk away?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've waited 10 years, watched you live in the house my father built, worked the land my father cleared. And now you think you can keep it all just because your giant wife managed to squeeze out a premature baby? No. This ends today." One of the men with Marcus raised a rifle. Clayton saw it happening and dove sideways just as the shot came. The bullet punched through the wall where he'd been standing, sending splinters flying. "Eleanor, get under the bed. Now." Clayton's voice was command, not request. "And don't come out no matter what you hear." But Eleanor wasn't moving. She'd wrapped Grace in blankets and placed her in the drawer they'd been using as a makeshift cradle. And now she was reaching for the revolver on the bedside table, her hand steady despite having given birth hours ago. "I'm not hiding while Marcus burns down our house with us inside." She checked the cylinder, confirmed it was loaded. "You taught me to shoot. Time to see if I learned. Eleanor, you just had a baby, and now I need to protect her." Eleanor moved to the window on the opposite side from Clayton, staying low, the gun heavy in her grip. "What's the plan?" "We hold them off until Danny gets back with help. He went to get the sheriff after the baby was born. Should be back within the hour. An hour." Eleanor looked at the 3 men below, saw them spreading out surrounding the house. "Can we last that long?" "We don't have a choice." What happened next would be retold in Montana Territory for years. The pregnant woman not even 6 hours past delivery standing at a bedroom window with a revolver, the desperate rancher defending his newborn daughter, and the nephew driven mad by grief and greed, determined to burn it all down rather than accept defeat. Marcus's men set fire to the barn first. Smoke rose thick and black into the afternoon sky. The horses inside screamed, and Clayton had to hold himself back from running out to save them. That's what Marcus wanted, to draw him out, to separate him from Eleanor and the baby. Then they set fire to the bunkhouse, then the equipment shed. 3 sides of the ranch burning, the flames climbing higher, the heat intense even from inside the main house. "They're going to burn us out." Eleanor's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Force us outside where they can shoot us." "I know." Clayton was at the gun cabinet loading rifles, checking ammunition. "But we make them pay for it. Every step they take toward this house costs them blood." The first man who tried to approach the front porch took a bullet from Clayton's rifle. He went down screaming, clutching his leg. The other 2 scattered, taking cover behind the burning barn. Marcus's voice rang out high with hysteria. "You can't win, Clayton. I brought enough men to wait you out. You have a newborn baby in there. How long can you hold out with her crying, needing to be fed while smoke fills the house?" He was right. Already Grace was fussing, not quite crying, but making small, distressed sounds. The smoke was seeping in through the broken window, making breathing difficult. And Eleanor, so strong hours ago, was starting to fade. Birth had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. "Clayton," her voice was weak, "I need you to listen to me." "No." He knew what she was going to say, could see it forming in her eyes. "No, Eleanor. If it comes down to it, if they breach the house, you take Grace and run. There's a root cellar behind the kitchen. You can hide there. Wait for Danny. I'm not leaving you. You have to." Eleanor's hand covered his, gripping with surprising strength. "Clayton, that baby is everything we fought for, everything we bled for. She's proof that Philadelphia was wrong, that I'm not broken, that we built something that will outlast us. You cannot let Marcus kill her." "Eleanor, I love you." The words came out rough, unplanned. "I know we agreed not to. I know this was supposed to be a transaction, but I love you, and I'm not losing you to that mad bastard outside." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Then make sure you don't. Make sure we all survive this. Because, Clayton, I love you too, and I want to spend the next 50 years proving it. A sound from downstairs. Breaking glass. Footsteps. They're inside. Clayton raised his rifle, moving to the bedroom door. Eleanor, whatever happens, you shoot anyone who comes through that door who isn't me. Wait. Eleanor struggled to her feet, swaying but determined. She reached into the drawer where Grace lay sleeping, miraculously peaceful despite the chaos. She pulled out a folded paper, pressed it into Clayton's hand. If I don't make it, give this to Grace when she's old enough. Tell her about Philadelphia. Tell her about doctors who were wrong. Tell her that her mother was called a giant and a freak and unwomanly, but she was strong enough to prove them all wrong. You'll tell her yourself. But Eleanor's eyes said she didn't quite believe it. Clayton moved to the door, rifle ready. Behind him, Eleanor stood with the revolver, her body between the door and her baby. If Marcus wanted Grace, he'd have to go through both parents, and neither intended to make it easy. The footsteps climbed the stairs. Slow, deliberate. One person, not three. Clayton sighted down the barrel, finger on the trigger, waiting for the door to open. When it did, the man who entered wasn't one of Marcus's hired guns. It was Marcus himself. His face was blackened with soot, his expensive suit torn and burned. He held a pistol, but it hung loose at his side, not quite aimed. And his eyes, when they met Clayton's, were wells of grief and rage, and something that might have been regret. It's over, Uncle. My men are dead. The sheriff shot them when they tried to stop him. Danny and the others are outside putting out the fires. I'm the only one left. Then drop the gun and surrender. Clayton's rifle didn't waver. You're not taking this family from me, Marcus. I don't want to. Marcus's laugh was broken. I never really did. I just wanted you to hurt the way I hurt. Wanted you to know what it felt like to lose everything. I do know. I lost Anna. I lost 3 children before they were even born. I've lived with that pain every day for 2 years. But you still had the ranch. Marcus's voice cracked. You still had Father's legacy. You still had a future. All I had was whiskey and rage and the certainty that you'd stolen everything from me. I didn't steal anything. Clayton's voice softened just slightly. Thomas left the ranch to me because he knew you weren't ready for it. He wanted you to grow up first, to stop drinking, to become the man he couldn't be. He wanted me to become you. Marcus's pistol rose slowly, but not toward Clayton, toward himself. He wanted me to be the son who survived instead of the son who killed his mother being born. And I couldn't do it, Uncle. I couldn't be what he wanted. So I became what I hated instead. Marcus, don't. Clayton lowered his rifle. We can fix this. You can get help. You can still become the man Thomas hoped for. No. Marcus's smile was sad. It's too late for me, but it's not too late for her. He looked past Clayton to where Eleanor stood, the revolver still trained on him, her body shaking with exhaustion, but unbending in its determination to protect her child. Tell your daughter about me. Tell her about the man who was too weak to survive his own grief. Maybe she'll be strong enough to learn from my mistakes. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marcus's body crumpled, the pistol falling from his hand. Clayton lunged forward, catching his nephew before he hit the floor. Blood spread across Marcus's chest, dark and fatal. I'm sorry. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Tell Grace I'm sorry I tried to take her future. She deserves better. You all deserve better. He died in Clayton's arms, his eyes going glassy, his last breath escaping in a long sigh. And Clayton Ashford, who'd lost his father and his brother and his first wife, who'd fought so hard to build something lasting, held his nephew and grieved for all the ways grief had destroyed them both. Behind him, Grace started to cry. Not the distressed fussing from before, but a full-throated wail that spoke of hunger and discomfort and the pure vitality of a child who intended to live. Eleanor holstered her revolver and picked up her daughter, bringing her to her breast. The baby latched on immediately, nursing with the fierce determination of a survivor, and Eleanor, exhausted and traumatized and still bleeding from childbirth, stood like Montana timber, unbending despite the storm. In the days that followed Marcus's death, Helena's undertaker came to collect the body. There was a small funeral, just Clayton, Eleanor. Mrs. Hayes and Danny Two Rivers standing in the rain as Marcus was buried next to his father in the small cemetery behind the church. No eulogy, no tears. Just the acknowledgement that a troubled man had finally found peace. The barn was rebuilt by autumn, the bunkhouse by winter, and Grace, tiny survivor that she was, grew stronger with each passing day. She nursed with fierce determination, gained weight steadily, and by 6 months was already trying to pull herself up on furniture, eager to explore the world that had tried so hard to keep her from being born. Eleanor's recovery was slower. The birth had taken more from her than she wanted to admit, and Dr. Mitchell made her promise to wait at least 2 years before trying for another child. "Your body needs time to heal," he'd said firmly. "You've earned that much." And so they settled into a rhythm. Work and rest. Building and healing. Learning to be a family rather than just survivors of a common catastrophe. By the time Grace took her first steps at 10 months old, walking from her father's arms to her mother's, with a determination that made both parents laugh through tears, the ranch felt like home again. The ghosts were still there, Anna and Thomas and Marcus, but they were quieter now, less demanding. The past was the past. The future belonged to the living. And 5 years later, the epilogue came 5 years later. The ranch had been rebuilt bigger and stronger than before. The barn was new, the bunkhouse expanded, the main house reinforced with stone chimneys and solid foundations. 5,000 acres had become 7,000 through careful management and hard work. Grace was 5 years old, tall for her age with her mother's strength and her father's steady determination. She helped with horses, learned to ride before she could read, showed no fear of the land that had tried so hard to kill her before she was born. Eleanor stood on the porch watching her daughter lead a mare around the corral. She was pregnant again, 7 months along with twins, this time boys that kicked like mules, and made her wonder how she'd survive delivery. But Dr. Mitchell was confident. Eleanor had carried Grace to term and delivered her despite complications. These boys would be easier. Clayton came up behind her, his arms circling her swollen waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. Who'd have thought that telegram would lead to this? Eleanor leaned back against him, her hands covering his where they rested on her belly. Philadelphia wouldn't believe it. The broken woman with 3 healthy children and a ranch that's thriving. You were never broken, just growing in hard ground. And Montana timber that grows in hard ground is stronger than anything cultivated in soft soil. Grace looked up from her work with the horse, her eyes finding her parents on the porch. "Mama, why does everyone in town call us Montana timber?" Eleanor smiled. "Come here, baby girl. Let me tell you a story." Grace ran over, climbing the porch steps with the boundless energy of childhood. Eleanor pulled her daughter onto her lap, careful of the babies in her belly, and began the story she would tell many times over the years. Montana timber grows in the hardest places, where the wind is cruel and the ground is frozen and everything tries to kill you. But timber that survives that kind of hardship becomes stronger than steel. It bends in storms, but it never breaks. Like you. Grace's eyes were wide, like all of us. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead. "Your father and I, we grew in hard ground. I was told I was broken. He was told he'd never have a family. But we found each other, and we built something that couldn't be destroyed. And you? Grace Clayton Ashford, you're the proof that hard ground grows the strongest timber." Clayton sat beside them, his weathered hands gentle as he touched his daughter's hair. "And someday, when you have children of your own, you'll tell them this story. About the grandmother who came from Philadelphia, who was called a giant and a freak, but who proved that strength is more valuable than beauty, who stood in a burning house and protected her baby with nothing but a revolver and pure determination." Grace considered this seriously. "Will I be strong like Mama?" "You already are." Eleanor's voice was firm. "Every day you get stronger, because you're Montana timber baby girl, and Montana timber never breaks." The sun set over the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the Ashford ranch house, a family sat together, bound not by blood alone, but by the shared experience of surviving when everyone said they wouldn't. of building when everyone said they'd fail, of proving that sometimes the most broken-looking things are actually the strongest. And in the cemetery behind the house, two graves stood side by side. Anna, beloved wife, who'd been too delicate for Montana's demands, and Marcus, troubled nephew, who'd been destroyed by his inability to forgive. Both mourned, both remembered, both part of the story that made the Ashfords who they were. But they were ghosts now. The past was past. The future belonged to Grace and her unborn brothers, to children who would grow up knowing that their mother had been told she was defective and had proved everyone wrong, that their father had been told he was too old, too broken to start over, and had done it anyway. Montana Territory in 1881 was still a hard place, still cruel to the weak, still demanding of everyone who tried to tame it. But the Ashfords had learned how to survive, had learned that love isn't always gentle or romantic or easy. Sometimes love is standing back to back with someone while the world burns around you. Sometimes love is believing in each other when everyone else says you'll fail. And sometimes love is looking at someone the world calls broken and saying, "No, you're exactly what I need. Exactly as you are, no changes required." Eleanor stood and moved to the porch rail, her daughter beside her, her husband behind her, the babies kicking in her belly. She looked out over 7,000 acres of Montana rangeland and felt for the first time since leaving Philadelphia completely at home. She'd been called a giant, a freak, unwomanly, defective, broken beyond repair. But Philadelphia had been wrong about everything. Eleanor Bradford Ashford was Montana timber. She'd bent in the storms. She'd survived attempts to burn her down. She'd proved that strength was more valuable than delicacy, that determination mattered more than conventional beauty, that the things people called flaws were actually the foundations of survival. And she would never apologize for taking up space again. Grace tugged on her mother's hand. "Mama, tell me about the day I was born, about how you shot at bad men while I was being born." Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "That's a story for when you're older, baby girl." But Clayton met his wife's eyes over their daughter's head, and something passed between them. Memory of that terrible day. Memory of standing together against impossible odds. Memory of choosing each other and their child over everything else, including their own survival. They'd made it. Against Philadelphia's diagnosis. Against Marcus's hatred. Against Montana's cruelty. They'd built something lasting. Montana timber never breaks, and the Ashford family was living proof.